Intermittent fasting is one of the hottest topics in nutrition today. But what actually happens to your body when you start intermittent fasting? So, in this video, we're going to talk about what happens to your body when you start fasting for 30 days. I'm a family physician, and let's talk about fasting. Now, the first thing that happens when you start intermittent fasting is that you lose water weight. This is because fasting causes you to have fewer carbohydrates. And where do we store our body's reserve form of carbohydrates? We store them as water. It's called glycogen. And so when you eat a meal, it's broken down into its basic components: amino acids, glucose, and then fats. The amino acids are used to make protein. The glucose is either immediately used by your cells for energy, or it's stored as glycogen in your liver and muscles. And there's enough glycogen in your liver and muscles to hold several hundred grams of glucose. And each gram of glycogen holds 3 to 4 grams of water. So when you eat a meal, particularly a carb-heavy meal, you'll gain several pounds of water weight because of the extra glycogen storage. So it is very common when you start intermittent fasting and reducing the number of carbs that you eat to lose 2, 3, 4 pounds in the first couple of days. Now, is that fat loss? Not really. Is it muscle loss? No, that's just water loss, because you're converting all that glycogen back into its basic component, which is glucose, and it's getting burned up by your cells. And the water that was bound to that glycogen is also getting released from your cells and is being excreted through urine. So the first couple of days, if you step on the scale and you see that you've lost 3 pounds, don't get too excited. Don't think that you've lost fat. You've just lost water weight. The second thing that happens when you start fasting is that your body starts to burn fat for energy. And this happens usually within the first day, but certainly within the first week. As your body depletes its glycogen stores, it has to start looking for another source of energy. And so it starts turning to your fat stores. And it begins to burn fat, and ketones start to build up in your bloodstream. And then that process continues over the next several weeks and months. Now, does your body preferentially burn fat when you're doing intermittent fasting versus when you're not? Well, yes, it does. Because one of the things that happens when you do intermittent fasting is that you keep insulin levels lower. Insulin is a hormone that's released after you eat that prevents your body from burning fat. So, when you're eating all the time, you're constantly having little spikes in blood sugar, which triggers the release of insulin, which then prevents your body from burning fat. So, the less often you eat, the less insulin you have, the more your body is going to tap into those fat stores and burn fat for energy. The third thing that happens when you start fasting is that your body starts to heal itself. Now, how does fasting lead to healing? Well, fasting triggers something called autophagy. Autophagy is the Greek word for eating itself. And what happens during autophagy is that your body starts breaking down old damaged proteins and other cellular debris and recycles it into building blocks to make new proteins. So it's kind of like housekeeping for your body. It is a way for your body to clean out all the old damaged stuff and reuse those building blocks to make your body run more efficiently. So all sorts of chronic diseases, from Alzheimer's to cancer to diabetes, are slowed by the process of autophagy. And many of those diseases occur because of the buildup of damaged proteins and damaged mitochondria. And so, by doing intermittent fasting and triggering autophagy, you're actually slowing down the progression of chronic diseases like those that I mentioned. So it's actually pretty cool. Another thing that happens when you start fasting is that your brain starts to shrink. Now, I know that sounds like, oh my gosh, my brain's gonna shrink. That doesn't sound good. But here's the deal. There's 2 types of brain cells, neurons, and then there's also glial cells. And for most of our lives, particularly in our early lives, we're making tons of new glial cells. Glial cells provide support for our neurons. They make myelin, they help protect our neurons, they feed our neurons. And so, when we're young, we're making tons of new glial cells. But as we age, we stop making as many new glial cells, and the ones that we have start to die. And so what happens is that there's a gradual loss of glial cells as we age. And if you don't have enough glial cells, you have neurons without the support that they need. So they become overgrown with the wrong kind of neurons, and that can cause a whole host of neurological problems. So when you start fasting, what happens is that you stimulate the production of new glial cells, and that helps to reverse this age-related decline in glial cells. So you want lots of glial cells. You want a youthful amount of glial cells. And another really interesting thing that happens when you start fasting is that you also stimulate the production of new neurons. Where do these new neurons go? They go to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is part of your brain that's involved in memory and learning. So there are people who do intermittent fasting who notice that their memory improves. And that's because you're stimulating the growth of new neurons in your hippocampus. And those neurons then connect with your glial cells, and it helps improve your cognitive ability and memory. Another really amazing thing that happens when you start fasting is that it stimulates the growth of new blood vessels. This is called angiogenesis. So when you start fasting, your body thinks, wow, this person isn't eating anything. So maybe I need to start growing new blood vessels to make sure that he or she gets nutrients. And so it starts to grow new blood vessels. This is really great for healing, for fighting inflammation, and for improving overall health. Another thing that happens when you start fasting is that you reduce inflammation. Virtually every condition that you can think of is either caused by or made worse by inflammation. That includes diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, arthritis. Inflammation is at the heart of virtually all chronic medical conditions. And when you start fasting, you drop inflammatory markers like hsCRP, interleukin-6. You drop them all. They all get better. So, if you suffer from a chronic medical condition that's associated with inflammation, intermittent fasting may be a powerful tool to help you fight that condition. Another thing that happens when you fast is that you increase your IGF. IGF stands for insulin-like growth factor. It's made by your liver and it helps regulate growth. And it turns out that lowering IGF is associated with longevity, and therefore you're probably wondering, wait a minute, if fasting helps me live longer, if fasting lowers IGF, why would I ever want to eat? So the answer to that is there's a huge difference between the type of food that you eat and the amount of food that you eat. If you eat healthy keto, if you eat carnivore, you can actually increase your IGF while you're doing intermittent fasting. On the flip side, if you're doing veganism, if you're doing vegetarianism, or if you're just eating a regular Western diet, even though you're doing intermittent fasting, your IGF will not go down. So the combination of eating healthy keto or carnivore and doing intermittent fasting is the most powerful way to drop IGF. And there are people who have done studies looking at centenarians, people who have lived to be 100 years old, and they find that these centenarians almost always practice some form of intermittent fasting, and they have very low levels of IGF. So those are the top 8 things that happen when you start intermittent fasting. Now, if you'd like to dig deeper into intermittent fasting, I've got a ton of videos on my channel. I'll put a playlist right here for you to check out. Also, if you'd like to ask me your personal questions about intermittent fasting or keto, come over to my website and become a patron. On my website, I've got personalized one-on-one coaching. And we've helped thousands of people around the world turn their health around using intermittent fasting and keto.